Hello and welcome to the Paper Prototypes podcast. I'm your host Rex, and here I'm with Hunter, the dev of Path of Achra. So Hunter, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your game?
Hey, how's it going? My name's Hunter. My name that I use for deving is Alfsire. I kind of find it to be kind of a stupid name, so I'm asking to not be called by that right now, but that's how you might recognize me. I made the game Path of Achra, which is like a sort of a traditional roguelike adjacent type thing. Um, my background in games is just making Warcraft 3 maps. I don't really have any kind of software background or anything. So this whole project was sort of meant to be a learning experience, and it's turned into a game that people are playing, and I've been able to spend a lot of time working with and adding things to. And yeah, I'm interested to talk about it for sure.
Why don't you describe Acro to anyone who hasn't played it?
Yeah, it's sort of like it's a traditional roguelike. So you move through levels, killing all the enemies, and it's turn-based. And it's basically like bump combat. That's how traditional roguelikes usually work, is you just kind of press a direction towards an enemy, your little character bumps into them, you do damage. But behind all that, there are a ton of calculations happening. And my game is sort of based around creating a broken build. Uh, I think my Steam description, I put broken build sandbox. That was like I'm proud of that little line there. And it's just so in Path of Acre, you just sort of combine armor, powers, weapons, religions, stuff like that, and you create something that you basically create chain reactions of damage that kill all your enemies, and you move through and you try to get to the end. And yeah, mechanically, that's what the game is. It's sort of flavored around ancient, like Sumerian mythology, it's sort of ancient Earth fantasia. I was interested in that kind of setting, like not kind of deviating from medieval fantasy a little bit, and looking at like sort of the idea of like an ancient vanished Earth, and using a lot of occult stuff and different languages and stuff like that.
Yeah, why don't you tell me more about that Sumerian influence? Because I picked up a lot of a culture that I didn't quite recognize while playing your game.
Yeah, well, it actually, I think it's actually a bunch of cultures. I try to use stuff from different languages and try to keep them kind of in little groups based around different elements. Um, like this is probably the most generic things. You'll see a lot of like Norse language stuff related to lightning. So like items that do lightning damage might have a name that means like spear in Norse, ancient in Old Norse or something. But like Sumerian stuff, like I have like a lot of the gods are specifically Sumerian, like from Epic of Gilgamesh and that kind of thing. Like there's Humbaba, who's a monster, who's the monster in Epic of Gilgamesh. But Humbaba is a god that you can worship. He's like a blood god, and yeah, there's a bunch that are drawn directly from mythology, and there's a lot of stuff. It's sort of just like it takes a word from a language and sort of warps it a little bit, kind of like the way like Pokemon are named a little bit, like uh, like how they kind of warp an English word, like Beedrill or something. Um, so yeah, that might be what gives it that impression. I'm very interested in that stuff. My educational background is like poetry, ancient mythology, ancient epic poetry, that kind of thing. And it's been like it's something that like I kind of fit the stereotype where I studied all that stuff. I never used it in my life afterwards. I worked like service jobs. I was working in a bakery most recently. Um, but it's been amazing that like a video game of all things is where I got to sort of start to use some of that knowledge. So I've been really happy about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I haven't heard anyone bring up the Epic of Gilgamesh since I was studying art history.
Yeah. Hey, it's coming back. People are talking about it.
All the Sumerian heads are coming out of the woodwork. It's
Yeah,
growing
yeah.
movement.
It's the year of Gilgamesh, I think.
So why don't you tell me about the mood that you were trying to evoke with Path of Achra, because I think that was one of the things that stood out the most to me when I was playing, is that it's very surreal and dreamlike.
Yeah, yeah, surreal, dreamlike, also just like kind of dark fantasy, sort of mystical. I really wanted that mystical feeling, sort of the otherworldly feeling. I like the title of the game, Achra. That's from Citra Achra, which is from the Kabbalah. It means the other side, and I kind of wanted to go with that idea. Like that's sort of something that I think that's an idea from like the Conan stories, like the author of those. Like he talks about like using a vanished Earth as a setting because you don't have to adhere to like specific history or specific details. You can sort of use all that stuff but create your own thing.
What do you mean
And
by a
that's sort of
vanished Earth?
like it's like a history that's presented as both real and unreal at the same time. Like it's something that you're going with the premise that it existed, so it's connected to stuff that you're drawing from reality, but it vanished. Like it's like Atlantis, like it sank below the ocean. It's a forgotten age, that kind of thing. I just kind of like that as the idea of a setting because you can just sort of draw in all sorts of different um, just things from culture, mythology, anything you want.
Um, the world is in some regards quite nightmarish, I imagine, for the average person to be living in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
How
it
do you
did.
think the average person is doing in your world?
Well, this is yeah. I mean, so the in the lore, which I literally have just been making up in the past couple months, so I can't really say that it's what the game was founded around. But the idea is that the path that the player is on is a specific area in the world. That's like like the spiritual center. This is where all the conflicts. This is where like the mystical conflict reaches its ultimate resolution. This is where everything is like centering and battling, and you try to get to the end and get to the star path. And so by that premise, there's a world around it where people sort of live more normally and aren't constantly like getting killed by rat men or whatever. But um, yeah, it is pretty nightmarish. And I mean, originally there was sort of more of a like cosmic horror is cool. I like that stuff, and going with the idea of demons and monsters everywhere, stuff like Berserk. I mean, all this stuff is sort of in the imagination right now for a lot of people, I think. But yeah, I think if I think about a normal person living in Accra, I think about sort of the tangential area that I've just made up. That's not this path specifically. I wouldn't imagine people living on the path.
And what exactly is the, because there's four pillars and then there's a
Yeah,
gate that I got
you
through
know,
and I achieved
yeah.
enlightenment and I was like, what just happened?
It just is what it is. It just works. You got to have it. You got to have the towers. You got to have the gates.
So you built your game first and then built the lore around it. Is
Yeah, yeah. I was like excited when I first started making it. I was excited just to make pixel art. I didn't really have an idea going into it except just subconsciously the kind of things I liked. I wanted to make a little roguelike game. I was trying to learn Godot. That's the engine it's built in. So I started trying to make a roguelike that worked. Just make like little levels. The reason why the levels are only one screen is because I couldn't figure out how to make larger levels without lagging the game. So there's a lot of design decisions in the game that are based off of sort of my own inability, my own inexperience, I guess. Like I said, it's a learning project, but yeah, I did not have any of this lore. This wasn't even thought about. It's not something I wanted to think about before making the game. I've just with my experience with creative writing and poetry, I found that if you plant like the pleasure of world building can be a very seductive thing and a very distracting thing, and it can also create sort of this imbalance where you have all these ideas about like this setting, but you don't have it actualized in any way. Like you don't have a story, you don't have anything written about it. you don't have a game about it. So I wanted to start with like a thing first, and then create like that. Like so, like now I'm engaging in the pleasure of that world building and the lore entries and stuff like that. And I'm glad I did it this way. I mean, I've it's just something. It might just be how I sort of work creatively, but um, I think I think it was really helpful. Just not like intentionally not trying to world build before making it, because that can be kind of suffocating for me.
Do you feel that having built a world and then trying to piece together the lore also can create, or at least help you create, a feeling of like surrealness to your world?
I think so, yeah, because I sort of have to make things work, and there is, yeah, it's not like initially planned out in a way that's like systematic or scientific. So the inconsistencies have to be resolved through ambiguities and mysteriousness. It just has like a fictive technique that's pretty that makes a lot of sense to me, and it does create a surreal vibe for sure.
So the game, what you were explaining a lot earlier, is it's heavily inspired by Rogue. Tell me about your experience with what types of games you've played before, and how you've come to like, I guess, Rogue, or were you just inspired by Rogue as a game?
I think I'm inspired by the tradition of people making roguelikes, like games like Rogue. I think specifically the games that I've played a lot in that vein are Dungeon Crawl, Stone Soup, and Tales of Majayal. And I didn't play those a lot until I was like later in life. I sort of developed interest in it. I think it started with Dwarf Fortress, just the idea of these like simulated worlds, like the vastness of it, and sort of the mysteriousness that you create with like the low graphics, the ASCII characters. Um, but I think I started really appreciating it. I was in AmeriCorps, and we were living in these cabins up in the woods, and we didn't have any internet or anything. And I had like a really weak laptop, much like I do now. And the only games I could play on it were Tales of Majayal Tome and Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, which is just people just call that DCSS. And I just played a ton, and I really fell in love with the pixel representation. And both those games, like Path of Achra, like you have a little unit and you can put armor and weapons on them. It's all static pixel. Aren't really a lot of animations or anything. And so I think that really imprinted in me a desire for that kind of environment for a game.
And then from there, you started experimenting with pixel art as well?
Yeah, I think I never really made pixel art until I was trying to make a game. The pixel art is very new to me too, along with the development. I think, and I should also mention, like the games that I would also play a lot when I wasn't like trapped with a laptop in the woods was Warcraft 3 custom maps. I played those for like probably 15 years, and I made maps, and that's probably like that is the bulk of my. And it's embarrassing for me to say this for some reason, but I feel like that like trained me to be a game designer, like making maps in Warcraft 3, because I was just making basically games within the game, and I could test them immediately. And I was making them to play with my friends and play with other people. And so that also had a huge influence. But yeah, I didn't imagine I could make an actual game in real life and for many years. And I think this project is sort of an act of frustration, if anything. I was like, I didn't want to make Warcraft 3 maps anymore. And it's something that like if I start doing it, it's incredibly addicting for me, because you can make a game so easily and share it so easily, but it doesn't really go beyond Warcraft 3. So it's yeah, it's something I have to sort of stay away from now. But yeah, so I just had a desire to make something that could be shared outside of that, and that led me to making the pixel art. Um, and visual art is something I've always kind of wish I'd practiced and was good at. So it's been really fun just getting to do it. Uh, One of the other reasons I chose to make a roguelike was because the scope of it is so manageable for one person, because you don't really have animations. People are even lucky to get pixel art in a traditional roguelike. So it was nice to just be able to having it be that simple meant I could make a ton of content and it wouldn't be too time consuming to like keep up with the visual representation of it.
Since you're a fan of the original roguelikes, which just aren't really something I've gotten around to playing a lot of, how do you feel about the discussion around people defining the genre of roguelike versus roguelite?
I think I spent a couple months where I was angry about it, but I don't. There's just nothing you can do. Like it's a marketing force. There's no stopping it, and it's not really a good name for a genre. Like the word roguelike isn't really a good name anyway. But it's become a marketing term that people use. Like we have roguelike 4X's, we've got roguelike city builders, like roguelike deck builders, etc. Like it doesn't really it's gotten to the point where if something is called a roguelike, like I think it's I think it's genuinely an unhelpful term at this point. Like I would consider not calling this game a roguelike if I made it like 2 years from now. It's because I mean you see people see that word and just get confused. Like it's genuinely a confusing word now. And it used to have a really specific meaning, and that meaning is maintained by certain communities. Like the roguelikes subreddit is really they're really focused on keeping the definition, or at least keeping it close to that definition. And their Discord server too. And my game, actually, I wouldn't even. Technically, my game isn't. I don't really think my game's a traditional roguelike either. Like I take a lot of liberties. I move it towards like build crafting and ARPGs like Diablo and that kind of thing. But it's just like I don't know. So my feelings on on that debate and people, I really respect people that are trying to maintain the definition because it is a distinct thing, and it actually helped me like share my game a lot because the community of people that want games that fall under like the real roguelike definition are really enthusiastic. So the fact that I was making something kind of like that gave me a way to share it and like people that would be immediately interested in it. So I really am appreciative of that. But personally, I don't know if it's possible to stop it from becoming a meaningless term. It already sort of is too for most players and people that aren't really into the classic ones.
I've come to understand roguelike as simply a structure of how the game is presented, where it's like a circular loop. That's about it, really.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tautology. Like
But considering this was a practice project and traditional roguelikes in the traditional sense are pretty simplistic, why did you want to add essentially this concept of wanting to make these complex and overly powerful builds in your game?
it's similar to something I did in a Warcraft 3 map. Like I made a Warcraft 3 map that was trying to emulate roguelikes, and it turned into basically what Path of Achra is. It's just combining things and triggers and that kind of thing. Because yeah, it's interesting because in Warcraft 3, like you have a hero with 4 abilities. So I was trying to make a way that you could make a custom hero with like by like attaching this different effects to a limited number of actions. And that's basically what Path of Achra is. Like you're attaching a ton of effects to different things that you do. Like you can like when you attack, you make it so it creates fire, it creates lightning. And then you make it so when you create lightning, you gain charge or whatever. And that's sort of I guess I think that's a good perspective for me to hear because it doesn't to me, my game is very simple compared to like real traditional roguelikes. Like I don't have a lot of complicated equations going on behind the like under the surface. I don't have a lot of like like fluids moving around or anything like that being simulated. I don't have a lot of like wounds being simulated. It's just damage numbers and health bars and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, and so in my opinion, I don't like I didn't make it complicated enough. I felt like it's kind of a simplistic game compared to those that I try to like stand next to.
When building something that's built around essentially breaking the game, how do you deal with trying to find builds that might have been too easy to come up with that players would rely on versus things that might be too complex for anyone to ever functionally use?
I think the way you just described it is sort of how I try to look at it. If a combination of things in the game can become on like really easily and accidentally, and it just wins the game for you, so you're basically passive for like half an hour. That's something I try to address. But if it's something that wins the game for you, but it's kind of complicated to set up and come up with, and not a lot of people know about it, that's sort of something I'm okay with leaving in for the moment. Um, but like honestly, my attention is like my priority is like if something is an infinite combo, I have to deal with that. That's like an actual problem. If it can like lock the game, that's a problem. So like below that is stuff that's sort of like kind of powerful. And I find that stuff playing myself, but honestly like it would be impossible for me to find most of the imbalance if I was just testing it myself. So I'm like totally grateful and reliant on people in Discord, people on Steam, Twitter, or whatever, sending me messages telling me that something like didn't feel fun. And it's that's also been an interesting thing I've learned. Like when I was first starting, someone would send me a message like, "Oh, I came up with this combo. It's super powerful. I like beat the game really easily. I like no one could touch me. I felt invincible." And my response to that is like, "Okay, so I need to fix that. I need to make that weaker." And then they're like, "No, no, no, no. It's great. This is really fun." So that's something I've sort of learned is certain things like that, like coming from traditional roguelikes where you're sort of expected it's always supposed to be difficult, always you're always tense. um, that's sort of different than what a lot of players, like what most of my players want, actually. I've discovered, and so that's been really interesting, and it's been like an act of empathy on my part to try to make to sort of leave some of the more powerful combinations alone and to let people do them and to just enjoy it. So yeah, that's I don't know, like it's something where like I do try to balance it. It's constantly being balanced. It's very reliant on community feedback. But one of the reasons why I added that broken build sandbox line into the Steam description was sort of to set up expectations around that. Like I at one point it was a game that I was going to try to make really tight and tactical. If you've played Rift Wizard, I was very much inspired by Rift Wizard, and I wanted to sort of be like that. But at a certain point, um, I just sort of said, or I just sort of felt like it. People were just having fun being powerful, so I'm letting them be powerful, and that's something I'm constantly trying having to accept. But it works, So I don't know. I don't want to say I'm not trying to balance the game because I am, but I definitely my standard for what is too strong has definitely shifted.
Um, what would was there any moments that the community was like, check out this build I made, and you went, oh fuck, I need to fix that? Like just something that someone showed you, they're like, I can't believe they did that, and that's broken as shit.
Yeah, like certain things, like yeah, there have been so many. Um, Frequently, like there'll be something where like there'll be like three abilities, and one will buff you, like it'll buff you with something called inflame, and then the other one will be like when you apply flame to yourself, deal fire damage to an enemy next to you, and then there'll be another one that's like when you deal fire damage, apply inflame to yourself. Stuff like that is like it creates an infinite loop of damage, and like there literally is no way for you to die at that point. And that kind of thing I do try to fix. That's like mechanically like a just like a closed loop where you'll deal infinite damage to an enemy until it dies, or and it's just like I don't know. I think that's pretty reasonable to try to get rid of that stuff. But even something like that, if someone finds it, like they do, I found that people enjoy doing that. Where like my perspective, which is very different from a player's, which I have to keep in mind. Like if I see something like that, I see it as like a flaw in my own design ability. So like I have a much more negative reaction to it. And so it's hard for me to like try to remember that when players find things like that, like they probably enjoyed it. Like they probably enjoy finding some broken thing.
Totally didn't. Only class that I prestiged with was Flame Knight.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There was an infinite combo with that one at one point. I had to fix.
It's okay. If you take some martial skills, you'll get that combo again. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the new player experience, um, how do you feel you did onboarding new players when it comes to booting up the game? Because I think my first experience with it was I got there was a handful of images on screen. I clicked, and then a bunch of shit happened. There's a wall of text at the bottom that just described what just happened that I can't keep up with, and like half the map died. And
Yeah.
it's quite intimidating, but I will say it kind of sells that idea of like that surreal feeling that your game is going for.
Yeah, I felt like so with this kind of game and my own limits, like I wasn't gonna make the most polished like onboard ramp, like tutorialized smooth thing where you're like incrementally getting like eased into it. So my priority was making sure that like if you just kept starting the game and hitting tab or whatever, like stuff would happen and you could probably survive for a while and experience the fun of killing things. Um, so that's sort of like the extent of how much I like that. That's what I see as valuable to a new player is making sure that like even if they don't like assuming they're not going to read anything, assuming they're not going to try to understand anything, just making sure that if when they take an action, like if they press buttons and just the game will just start playing and you can just kill things and have fun and then that I think that it's more valuable to make someone sort of want to learn how to play it than to try to like cover every detail trying to teach them because they probably don't really care. But it's you know it's the idea of the new player experience is the hard thing because you have to really empathize with an experience that you're not going to be able to imagine very well. And it's the same like it's an experience that you don't hear about a lot either. Like a lot of new players don't tell you what their experience was. Like either they bounce off it or they get into it, and then you're getting the perspective of an experienced player who's like become interested and wants to learn how everything works. So I don't know. I felt like it could definitely be done better, but yeah, what you just described is sort of my hope is that like even if it's incomprehensible and intimidating, like you can still just go in and like click on things and you see this giant text like log like reeling by and you're just killing things and it's like kind of it's satisfying in a way and maybe you want to learn how to become more powerful.
There's a type of player that just their whole thing is making things as busted as possible involving all these little keywords, and my best friend is one of them. So when you
Yeah,
sent me
for
the
sure.
key, I texted him. I was like, "Hey, I'm about to play this game. You should look at it." And he just bought it right away. And he's like, "I'm in. I just beat." He beat it like the same day too. I was like, "Steven,
Nice.
what are you doing?"
I mean, some people beat on their first try. It's a game that's very like you can get broken if you know how these types of things work.
I also know that then there's cycles where the game gets more difficult, where the first cycle is
Yeah,
humility, which is the true game, and I'm in the cycle of I don't
probably like
remember.
fair and relation or whatever,
Something like that. How many cycles are there, and what was your thought process behind adding the cycles? Because to me, this kind of reminds me that there's like almost like there's eras where that first character succeeded, but now time has forgotten them, and I'm
Yeah,
repeating like the same path.
yeah. So cycles are something where, like I said, I don't know if you played Rift Wizard, but that game is like I'm very directly iterating on it. Like that's a game where it's all you don't have things like cycles or difficulty levels. Like the game is the game. It's a very like well balanced, well designed experience. And I just wasn't capable of that. I tried to be like that's like an ideal I strive for, but I couldn't reconcile that with the things I wanted to do with like the free building and the really like the tab gameplay and all that, like the stuff that makes it really easy to play. And when I had the demo out on Steam, I had it out for a couple months before releasing, and um, actually, I can't remember. I think it was, so. I had the game on itch.io before releasing it on Steam, and I had it on like a web version, and people were playing that a lot. And for a long time, there weren't any cycles, and I added them just because there were people playing it so much, and they wanted more challenge. They wanted more like variability, and I didn't want to like do a kind of a grindy thing that quote unquote roguelites tend to do, where you like like ascension levels, that kind of thing, although I guess it kind of amounts to that. But um so I just add the cycles. There's 24 of them, and it just lets you keep ramping up basically. It randomly scales enemies. It can make them like really powerful, and it also makes you gain levels faster, so you get even more points to make more broken builds. And it some people like I've tried to view it as like a way to sort of calibrate the game to be most enjoyable for yourself. Like some people are like say that they like to play it in cycle 6 specifically, like that's the best cycle for them, with like the balance of enemies being randomly powered up and more skill points. And some people like cycle 2. Some people only play on cycle 1. A lot of people only play on cycle 24. But when I came up with those, it's a pretty simple system. Like I said, just the random scaling. But I wanted to flavor it within like the mystical idea of Achra. So yeah, like you said, the idea of the cycles being named, the idea of like the universe restarting, and you're repeating the great spiritual struggle over and over, that kind of thing. I like that as a flavor.
What was the inspiration of having the world kind of load in like squares, I guess?
Oh, like the transition screen
Yeah,
thing.
everything like it'll just load as
Yeah,
like a bunch of bricks, and the bricks will fade away back to the normal
yeah.
map or the way the title screen works.
That's my attempt to come up with a transition screen in Godot. That's just like my me trying to. That's like the first thing I figured out how to do. Like the first transitional screen I figured out how to do was just making a bunch of squares and then fading them out. So it's just kind of stayed that way because I haven't gotten any complaints about it. It doesn't really have a specific significance. I mean, I think probably subconsciously I was just trying to keep it aesthetically coherent, like the idea of squares. I mean, it's a tile based, you know, you're living in a tile based reality when you're in a roguelike like this. So it's all about the squares.
And how do you end up creating what you think are interesting abilities for players to use when it comes to their builds?
I don't. So they're not all. I always wish they were more interesting, but what I try to do is, I think this is something that the Magic the Gathering creator talked about, is like the idea that you can have the flavor of something match up with its mechanics, like fire and attack and healing and that kind of thing, like death and like curses and enemies dying, like trying to make them, like when you're making something in a void, trying to make it sort of make it sort of reflect what its element is like lightning, increasing speed, that kind of thing. But then the way, like, when things interact, it kind of becomes more muddled. So I think what I tried to do is have, like, the abilities and the powers, they're all very specific. That's why the items are fixed abilities, so that they're like attached to the flavor of the item. And I don't know, I feel like once if I let, like, so if I was like, if I like had randomly generated items that had random powers and stuff, I think it would feel less flavorful. It would feel less. It would have less of an identity. It would have like that sort of. I think the word people use is oatmeal or something for procedurally generated stuff that sort of loses coherence, or loses it loses distinctive it loses all distinction. It doesn't really have a character when you start to like randomize and combine things too much, which is the danger of this game because you're combining everything, right? So I was trying to, when I designed the powers and I designed the items and the weapons and the starting culture, class, religion, like those things are all specifically like fixed and you're combining them. Sort of like and that's why I think about magic cards. Like you're combining these fixed entities, which are the cards, which have their like fixed art on them, that have their mechanic attached to that, and you put them together, and it creates like its own character, and that's sort of what I was trying to do here.
And what about coming up with uh some of the bigger systems that help with builds? Like what was your reasoning behind when you create your character, you end up making, their race, their, I guess, the god they worship, and then you have their class, but then on top of that you have like their prayers that they get and all the equipment that can change how you play, and then there's the prestige classes on top of that.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, in general, like, and this is something I learned when I was like, my Warcraft 3 maps are all a lot like this. Is you're just trying to maximize the number of like combinational elements, basically, and that's how you create a ton of variety. Is you have as many things as possible that you can combine, and you have as many like distinct things as possible that you can combine. So like the gods having prayers, that made religions, they're not just like an ability, it's an ability with the three active abilities you get. And then like the class having your armor and stuff, that makes it not just another ability, it also has a weapon, since maybe one of the weapons has an ability too. But like if you look at the culture, the like what would be called like a race start in another roguelike, that's like, it's basically just a trait. It's just an ability. So if they're all like that, it wouldn't be. It would feel. I feel like it would be more like it was just combining like single things together. And yeah, I mean the prestige class is something that came later, sort of like with the cycles too. Like it was something to make. And that was a great thing. I think it was something players were asking for. Is then I like something you could evolve into. I immediately thought of like Pokemon evolutions and how fun that is. So like it's just fun to sort of feel like you're gonna evolve into something. So that's sort of why I added those. Like they used to just happen to you. You didn't get to pick them. Like you would if you came to meet the requirements of one, you would just become it without it like warning you. Um, so yeah, that was just like, that was just an attempt to add another fun thing to like combine with everything else, basically.
And have you thought about changing the player icon when they evolve to get those prestige classes?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, you would. The idea is that the icon has like all your weapons and stuff on you, and that's what you're seeing. But like I've gotten a lot of people that like the I've really enjoyed making the prestige class like icons, and they're cool looking. And a lot of people have asked if they could just like look like their prestige class, which is which I totally get that. Like that makes sense. They're very epic. for sure.
And were you inspired at all by your literature background when it came to creating some of the archetypes? Like you have stuff like ooze and doom, which I've never seen in a game involving like I've seen fire and ice and martial, but I've never seen
Right.
doom or like astral and
Yeah.
psychic.
Yeah. The ooze is from Tales of Maj'Eyal. There's like an ooze mancer class, which I always thought was a cool idea. Which I need to actually add more stuff for that in this game. That's on my list. Um, Stuff like Doom is just trying to find synonyms for like curses or whatever. Like the idea of death damage is kind of funny to begin with, but I was yeah, just it was just sort of like the first synonym that I settled on or whatever, like the idea of cursing someone. Um, and then like stuff like blood and astral as elements. That's actually from the Dominion. Like, have you ever played like Illwinter games? They've made Dominions and Conquest of Elysium. They're like, I think they're a Swedish team, and they've been making these games for a long time, and they're like they're really popular niche like strategy games where
No, I
you
haven't
build.
heard of them before.
Yeah, they're really cool. They like are one of them. I think is a history teacher, so they use a lot of like ancient mythology, and they have like it's like a 4X with like 70 different nations you can play, and they're all like specifically based off of different world mythologies. But anyway, they have like blood and astral magic specifically, and those are both tied to like a hell dimension, astral horrors, that kind of thing, blood sacrifice. So that's definitely an influence from those games, for sure. But it's as far as my literature background, yeah, that had a big influence. Like especially with the little like poems at the start, all the flavor text. Like that's all stuff that's new. Like that wasn't in earlier builds of the game. That it's sort of been something where like I didn't really think anyone would play it. I didn't think it would be very popular. And it's it's not like a massively popular game, but it's gotten way more attention than I thought it would, and that's given me a bit of it's just given me a bit of confidence and made me want to start inserting other creative things into it. So that's where a lot of the language stuff comes from. It's absolutely me like projecting all that interest in poetry and literature into the game.
You also have quite a few classes where their whole thing is they convert items. So there's one that's like a Star Eater god that converts
Yeah,
everything,
yeah,
and then like there's an undead god that converts shit into gold, and there's an arch lizard prestige class. What
yeah,
was
yeah.
the inspiration behind wanting to convert things related to your religion?
Yeah, I think I think it might have even been a player suggestion, but just the idea that you can transform items. Um, it's it's something where like the game has fixed items and they never change. So it was like that for a long time. So the idea of like transforming them was actually relatively easy for me to do. A lot of things like I just don't do because I don't know how I would do them because I built the game as a beginner. A lot of the systems are kind of tangled up, and it would be impossible for me to do certain things that I wish I could just because I was I didn't build it in the most intelligent way. I've definitely learned a lot now, but um, transforming items is something that was actually really easy to do, and so I just turned into a mechanic and made a couple gods based on it. And it's sort of it's something that also works with the sort of little paper doll of the character. Like it doesn't break the game in any significant way. Like you can just change it, just changes the way you look. So it was an easy thing to add. A, Also again like a distinctive thing. Like I'm a, I think at this point when I'm designing stuff, I'm really trying to make sure that it's distinct compared to other things, not just like another color of damage or whatever, but like changing things in the game. That's sort of like the final. That's sort of what the design is narrowed down to. Is I had to make sure I'm making things distinct and interesting in that way.
And what about the music for Path of Acra?
The music is something that that's something else that I didn't really think I'd be able to do. But I downloaded like a music program on itch.io, and I just worked with it for a while. I think I made all the songs in like a couple days, and I'd like to add some more actually. But yeah, they're really simple. It's just it I made it sound better by making them slower, so I don't really have to worry about um, the tune very much. But it was interesting doing that because that's like like I felt myself using a part of my brain that I've never used before. It was a very strange feeling, but it was also sort of exhilarating. Um, and yeah, I just tried to make it sound like a dark fantasy chanting type thing. But I'm really happy with it, and I definitely want. There have been some more requests for like more music in it, and I'm excited if I can find a day to do it, just to sit down and focus on making some more music for it, because that was really fun for me to do.
So, is there what's it feel like, I suppose, to essentially create a game that you thought not too many people were going to play, and a lot of the flaws in it that you might have not liked ended up helped create a unique mood that a lot of people enjoyed and almost brought more people to your game than you initially thought?
That's a really good way of putting it. I think it made me learn, and this is something for a lot of anyone who's like trying to make something that might have my sort of temperament, or I'm a bit critical of everything I do, is that like it's given me a ton more confidence in sort of my subconscious decisions on how to do things. Just because like something that I could look at and say, oh, this is stupid, it's simple, it's like, you know, it's not interesting. Is that it's just me being like, it's just like it's just self-sabotage. Like it's not, at a certain point, I think I've learned that the most valuable thing you can do is let other people play your game and tell you what they like about it. Um, I think the lesson I took from all of this is that like you could like I can't. There's so many projects and my own projects that have just died in a vacuum because I made them. I thought they were bad. I never showed them to anyone, and then I abandoned it. So it's felt really really good to have people be interested in it. Like it's felt amazing. I never I never expected it. I thought it was going to be like sell like 100 copies or something. So I don't know. I think the lesson I'm taking is just to not don't destroy your own work if you think it's bad. Like it's good to try to like to have standards of quality, but at a certain point you have to show things to people, and that's where like you learn so much about what you're doing that's good by seeing what other people think of it.
What's been your favorite thing to flex as a with all the literature you have that you put in the game to be able to be like, yeah, I know about this odd 20th, I mean, second century poem that's in there.
um yeah, I think my enjoyment has just been with just with the gods, the deities. A lot of them are like specifically from Sumerian mythology, and it's funny. Like someone was like, at some point, someone was like asking me like, "Oh, what does Humbaba look like?" And then someone else like put a description from my game into chat into like Stable Diffusion and sent me some AI images of like a tentacle monster. And I wouldn't say I wasn't flexing, but it's like it's it is interesting to think about like how like you can learn about a specific thing and some people have no idea that it like exists. Like you don't have to put this into an AI image generator. Like this is a real thing. Like this is from something real. Like it's not a made up. It's not a made up word or anything. So I guess I don't know. That was kind of. It's been nice getting to sort of like spread some of that stuff to people that are just trying to play a game. It sort of force them to read things from like obscure ancient mythology a little bit. Not that they're like being forced to, but it's been nice to be able to just sort of embed that into the environment that people are playing in, I guess.
And do you feel like the ancient Sumerians would be happy with their legacy?
No, no, they wouldn't know what this is. Like this is probably be like this is just like this is like cursed, right? Like we're we're looking at it's like a cursed tablet or something. I don't know. I don't know what they would think.
That if you
Um,
just like went back
it's a
to
game. I mean, yeah, they
whenever they
played
were.
games. They played games. They had a game. They had like some kind of checkers like game. I think they'd get it. They know what's going on here. They would be confused that the game isn't like multiplayer. I think that's what would be confusing about it. Is the idea of single player games.
I like the idea of an old Sumerian, I guess, equivalent
Yeah,
to a bar, and you just throw down a Steam Deck, and you're like, "Behold,
yeah. You're
your
not playing.
culture."
Who are you playing with? Yeah.
So I think that concludes all of my questions, Hunter. So, is there anything you want to shout out at the end of the podcast? Any social media links or anything that you particularly want more eyes on, even like a local pizza place?
Yeah. I post on Twitter a lot. Uh, my Discord is really chill. Uh, I think I'd like to just shout out to all the people that have like helped me, especially like content creators. Blind IRL is a Dwarf Fortress streamer, and he has been really like since the beginning. He like found my game on itch.io. He's been streaming it, and that's been like huge in creating like really enthusiastic players. Everyone on my Discord has been really helpful. I'm grateful to all of them, and also just like other game devs that I found, and mostly through Twitter and Discords. There's like a small group of them that have been really, really helpful to me. Um, One of them, I think, if you want to check it out, Solash 2. He's making this game called Solash 2. It's another traditional roguelike, but it's got a really cool, ambitious world generation thing going on. Uh,
He's on my
yeah,
list to interview eventually. I
yeah,
need to reach out
he's
to him.
he's been really helpful to me. And it's just like I can't stress enough how helpful it is just to find other people create in your like in your genre. There's just been so much support from everyone. It's been really great.
Well, I think that concludes this episode. Um, the all the stuff is gonna be like this episode's gonna be uploaded on like YouTube and Spotify and Podbean and all that kind of stuff. You can find me on Twitter and Threads and Blue Sky, even though I mostly just use Twitter. But I mean, I'm there on the other ones too, theoretically.
Yeah, I know that is.
Down below is going to be to my link tree if anyone wants to see where all those links go, wants to find them easily. And of course, I do have a Ko-Fi if anyone wants to support me. It helps the podcast go. And I think that's everything. So thank you for watching. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.